I will discuss relevant issues affecting animals and pet owners today, how to avoid common problems, and how to extend the quality of life for your cherished companions. As a community advocate, I will also discuss important social issues that affect our city. I plan to showcase organizations and heroes who are doing amazing things to help others. Remember to tune in every Tuesday morning at 10, starting soon.
Do you want to relive the golden days of Stockton? Join Nate Knott on Stockton Alive every first and third Monday at 6 p.m. Tune into thevoiceofstockton.org.
For more information on the Voice of San Joaquin, go to tvosj.org.
With Matt George and Leo Biaz.
Cowbell Kingdom's podcast.
I got a fever, and the only prescription is for cowbell.
Thursday nights at 7 p.m. right here on KXVS, the voice of Stockton.
For more information on the Voice of San Joaquin, go to tvosj.org.
The Voice of San Joaquin and the Voice of Stockton presents Connections, Peace and Justice Radio with your host, Bruce Giudici.
And good evening, listeners. Tonight we are going to be discussing mediation and how that happens in San Joaquin County. And so here tonight we have two of the mediators who pretty much do that in this county. We have Janette Rossell and Robert Oakes, who both work with the San Joaquin County Bar Association, I believe, right? And that's so it's an arm. And your office pretty much tries to figure out ways for people to not have to deal with the court system, and that they can avoid it by going into mediation. So what I'd like to do is just first ask you what exactly is mediation? When we talk about mediation, sometimes it's thought of as being a way to just hammer out an agreement. Is that just what it is?
Well, we don't use hammers.
Oh, of course not.
we go for a softer, gentler touch these
Q-tips.
days.
Yeah,
Yes,
something like that.
Q-tips.
Stuffed animals.
Stuffed animals,
Yeah,
mostly.
hug it out.
That's good.
I think the first arm you're talking about is community mediation.
Okay.
So, if, say someone's having an issue with the neighbor, or maybe they're having an issue with the fence or the loud dogs or something of that type, they can contact our mediation center, call our phone line, and we will reach out to that other person and just offer the opportunity for them to come in and sit down and have a conversation. So basically, it's a voluntary process. If the both parties are not willing to sit down and meet and have a conversation, there's nothing we're going to be able to do to make them do that.
Now this has to be something that's kind of serious, more than just saying, well, I don't want to have bologna today. I want to, it has to be something that has risen to the level that there's some conflict between people, right?
Well, there's always conflict between people.
Yeah.
This is when conflict becomes mismanaged, or people aren't able to resolve it themselves. So, at its core, mediation is really facilitated negotiation. It's when when the communication and trust level breaks down between two or more parties, such that they can't communicate. A mediator comes in and through a variety of techniques, and depending on what the situation calls for, facilitates that negotiation. Typically in the community process and others, tries to rebuild that trust. At least you may not repair a relationship, but you need to at least rebuild enough trust so that they can negotiate for an agreement. Oftentimes the beauty of it is it enables people to talk about what's important to them in their dispute, whereas if they go to court, the court cares about what the law is and what the rules and the authority that the court has to weigh in. And actually, so we're not committed exclusively to keeping people out of court. We're also committed to helping people once they're in court to find the best way to resolve their dispute. Sometimes litigation's an appropriate dispute resolution process, but in our system, that's the only one that's available. And so we're trying to just provide alternatives to the litigation process that has a winner and a loser, and provide opportunity for people to talk to one another, and hopefully in the community model, model the kind of communication and negotiation behavior so that they can walk out of the room and never have to come back because they now know how to do that themselves.
Very good. So now you're both lawyers, right?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
So you know the system. So you know what where a conflict could go if mediation isn't successful, and if there has to be some sort of lawsuit. So you can advise folks as to, this is, you can tell them what the law is in particular for their conflict, if it even is that. Is it always a legalistic thing?
Typically, and go ahead and explain.
I was going to say, so typically we act as mediators. We're a neutral third party. I don't come into the room as an attorney. I come into the room as a mediator. And my goal is to find out where you're at and where the other side is at, and try to find a way to build some common ground so that the parties can discuss and actually hear each other. So a lot of times when you get angry and you're right, they're just being unreasonable, and you're not listening to them, you don't really hear what is really underlying their position. So when you don't hear each other, you're not really communicating.
Right.
So.
And it's usually not helpful to tell the party what the law is, because most of the time that's really not what is the core of their dispute. And so it frequently inhibits the ability to have that negotiated agreement. If you negotiate cases, and when you start mediating, a lot of times, particularly as lawyers, we'll get the summary of the case and we'll go, oh, I know where this should land. And they always land completely differently because it's dependent upon what's important to the parties.
Right.
I mean,
right.
They will come up with agreements that you or I might never go to, and our job,
because they know each other maybe, and they know how the other person
what's important to
react and what's important to them.
And also,
if they're a neighbor, or if they know the other person, they might care about the other person.
Yeah, yes, it's and that all of these dynamics. There's a relationship dynamic, and even it just depends, because I don't know what their values are, and so part of the process is to get them to talk about their values, what's important to them, to see if there is common ground. But frequently there's an old training tool that we use, which is tell the story about these two children who are fighting over an orange, and their mother comes in, or father comes in and cuts the orange in half. And if she had talked to them, one of them wanted the orange because one of them wanted to eat the fruit, and the other wanted the orange because they wanted to make cookies and needed the peel.
Yeah.
And so, not that you can always get that kind of win-win, but it's frequently the fact that they view the dispute differently, right, and value things differently. Because if they valued them the same, that's probably a great case for litigation, because then you're either going to have to split it, or one's going to have to win and one's going to have to lose. Right. But in this case, it's like you want certain things, the other party wants other things. What typically happens is, because their trust level is broken down and they haven't really heard each other, they haven't even been able to articulate that part of their dispute.
Or they just felt thwarted. Like they both wanted the orange. They wanted it for different reasons, but they both wanted the orange. So they felt like they were being thwarted. The other person was denying them what they wanted. But they didn't talk long enough to find out why they each wanted the orange.
So they'll dig in their heels, right?
Right. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, because I'd like to talk about, sort of what's happening in greater society here in terms of our inability seeming to listen to each other and to hear. But how do people find out about your services, and how do people know about you? I mean, the thing is that there used to be a mediation. Is there a mediation center still in town?
There used to be.
No, not any longer. Yeah. Okay, because that used to be like on Persisi or Pershing or something like that. Yeah, and so and it's gone now. How long has it been gone? And have you are your services like taking the place of that?
In 2014.
Okay.
The San Joaquin County Bar Foundation, it's part of the Bar Association, took over operating the old mediation center under the new name. It's Dispute Resolution Services.
Okay.
And the contract that they have with the court, they took the same phone number. So anybody that, even if you find on, like you Google search mediation or mediation center, you might find the old listing with the old phone number, but we have that phone number, so we still get those phone calls. Sometimes the courts will refer them, people that go in to file for civil harassment restraining order, small claims.
Civil harassment restraining order.
Civil harassment restraining order. Unfortunately, I think the name is kind of misleading because people think, oh, you know, my neighbor's harassing me, I'm going to go in and get a restraining order. Or the cop says, oh, they're harassing you, go get a restraining order. The fact of the matter is, if you want a restraining order under that particular statute, you have to go in and prove to the court that there's been an actual physical assault, physical violence against you, or somebody you're protecting, or an imminent threat of violence, or a conduct that would suggest an escalation and an imminent threat, like stalking would be one of those, or texting, I'd like to see your brain splattered all over the street kind of thing. So if you're going to court because, you know, you and your neighbor aren't getting along, that's not going to get you a restraining order.
Right.
So, but those are, today I went to civil harassment restraining order court, and of 6 cases, I saw actually 2 that were legitimate civil harassment restraining order cases. So the other 4 are things that we potentially could have mediated and helped, like
you park your
neighbors
car in front of my house and I don't like that.
Yeah, neighbors could, how can we share this limited space on our street?
Yeah.
But it's something that if they had actually taken, they received. We leave brochures with the court and flyers for mediation services, and so people can call us, and we can try to help them, work something out so that they can live in peace. Who doesn't want peace?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Everybody loves peace.
Yeah.
Because the other problem with even if you have a quote case that you can get the restraining order, a lot of times typically in those circumstances it's typically between 2 people who know each other and have a relationship, and so they get violated a lot. And so part of one of the roles we play in that is can we negotiate these 2 people staying away and managing? Maybe it's an ex-wife or partners who are fighting over the children, and so how are we going to drop off the children and not encounter so and so? Because the police department, law enforcement, that's just not for them to get into that, and literally they'll go back to the house over and over and over again because the person will return. And frequently the person who seeks a restraining order violates it as well. Now they're not the one who's supposed to adhere the rule, but they will reach out to the other party, and then it will devolve. And so we try to, even in those cases, and again, this is why the legal part's not so important, is like they may not stay away from each other. It may not be possible for them to stay away.
It's just like almost just setting the rules. It's just like, knowing what the boundaries are and helping people to understand what their boundaries are, and then working with those. Maybe.
Well, and if the parties agree what the boundaries are, then they have a stake in keeping the agreement, because they've had input. They are invested in, keeping that agreement.
The most important part about mediation is why it's an effective process is because it really does give the parties who are in dispute the opportunity to be heard in ways they'll never be able to be heard in court, because the court wants to know. The court doesn't want to know all the terrible things that happened between you and the horrible things that they said. Or
like Judge Giudici or something?
Yeah, somewhere between Judge Judy and Jerry Springer. That's what I was watching.
The court wants to know what are the facts that enable me to issue the restraining order or not.
Yeah.
And so we provide the opportunity. Well, you get to talk about all the other things. Or in a transaction, it's like, well, you know, a consumer transaction or a landlord-tenant. Well, I don't mind that I didn't get all my deposit back, but I just thought the landlord was really rude and dismissive and didn't let me explain this. And sometimes, like, doing that is like, typically there's still something that needs to be, some tangible benefit that needs to exchange, but they're not going to have that opportunity in court oftentimes.
Right.
And sadly, you know, we do go to unlawful detainer court as well. Those are the evictions.
Oh, okay.
And you see people who are struggling and they're having difficulty in their circumstances at that time, or it's been, you know, several months, not employed, whatever the problem is, the child support quit coming in, something like that. The judge can't hear that. The judge has to say, did you pay your rent? Oh. You didn't pay your rent? I'm kind of stuck. I understand.
My hands are tied.
But, you know, those are things that, you know, maybe the landlord, if there had been a conversation, if they weren't so embarrassed about their circumstances, they might have been more honest with the landlord. They might have been able to work something out. Those are the kind of things that people don't really want to discuss in court.
Now, if they come to the court, can they be referred to your services, or is that too late?
They are.
They are. Okay.
We are.
It's just not like. Okay. If the court recognizes that this is the type of dispute that you would handle, that could be better served by mediation rather than by a judicial decision.
This actually happened. Something like this actually happened to me a couple of days ago. I was sitting in court, and it was, I think, the second to the last case the judge was hearing. And it was a little sad, but the judge kept saying, the judge asked twice if the landlord would be agreeable to going out. She's the mediator's still here. Would you agree? Would you be agreeable to going out and trying to just work out something that, you know, between the two of you? And he just twice, like, no. And I think in my experience, because I have represented landlords and unlawful detainer in the past, my experience with that particular situation is that the landlords, usually they're getting a story, the rent's not coming in, they're getting a story, the rent's not coming in. And after about 6 months of trying to work with the tenant and the rent not coming in, they finally just say, I'm done. They file an eviction, and they just want the people out.
Right. They've had it. They're tired of the not really getting
but
anywhere. But they weren't necessarily talking with the person. They were just making demands and saying pay, and people didn't have anything.
So I think because maybe there wasn't real open and honest communication. Usually if there's more honest communication, there are landlords, if you're a good tenant, they want to try to help you out. They want to keep a good tenant, but they need to know what's going on. They need more information to say, oh, I'll work with you. I mean, there are some landlords that aren't going to, but I have been in the position of advising a landlord, and it's, you know, can you work something out? Is this a good tenant? Is this someone that you would keep if they could work it out? Yes. If they can't come up with the money, can you give them time to move out? Can you, like, say, hey, I'll just give up the past due rent. I just want you out in 30 days. Give me the keys. Leave it in good shape. You know, because the landlord has a reason to want to have an amicable parting of the ways, too, because they don't want their place trashed on the way out the door. So, you know, a lot of times it's just, you know, what is his interest? His interest, like, at some point they'll say, oh, I don't care about the money. I just want to get my property back. I want to be able to get a tenant in there that can pay the rent. Can they give me the keys? I don't care about the money. Their position is, well, I can't give you my money if I got to move. So, you know, you can kind of, you know, if you can get people to be
because they have to come up first and last where they're going.
Yeah.
So this is Peace and Justice Connections on the radio. We're talking with Janette Rossell and Robert Oakes with Dispute Resolution Services in San Joaquin County. Also, you might know it by the name of the Mediation Center. And do you have a phone number that people can call, that or a website or something that would be? I mean, if they're listening to this now and saying, "Boy, you know, I got a problem and I really need to deal with that," could they just call you up out of the blue and just make an appointment, or does it have to be some sort of referral?
They can call.
us up.
They can call.
Call me out of the blue, the green, the pink.
And you guys
the
are in
orange.
downtown Stockton, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And real close
We're
to...
actually in the In-Shape building.
Okay. Well, that's easy to see.
Yeah.
That's that big purple thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Purple, blue, something like that.
Yeah, purple, blue, whatever.
So that
And-
the website
Uh-huh.
for dispute resolutions is
Mhm.
www.disputeresolution.org.
All one word. Oh, that's easy.
Yeah, that'd be easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Great. And then
the
just
phone number is 474-8794.
8794.
Yes.
And they could also just call the main line, the Bar Association,
Oh, okay.
948-0125.
Okay. And then Don will put this up on the Facebook thing. So
Yeah.
so people can call.
And then the other thing that we don't have one yet. We don't have a date for one. But the other thing that we do is we actually train community members in these mediation skills, and so they can actually help with the programs we have. Or a lot of times they just take it back to their community and use it. And
teaching peace. That's cool.
Right. I did it when I first started, and I know it certainly made a difference in the way I practice and the way I manage in my home and just in interpersonal family life. What we try to help people do is we try to keep them as informed consumers. Like, we know what you want. But here's sort of like what your real options are. It's like one of those multiple choice questions that you don't get the right answer. Mm-hmm. You just sort of have to choose the best that are available. Yeah. And so we try to keep people informed about, well, if you want to litigate, here's what's likely to happen. Here's what it could cost you. You know, we can give you some statistics on whether that'll work or not. Some people just won't move, but.
Right. And it's really a process. I mean, people have to really understand that. I mean, and if you're doing it well, I mean, the thing is that people hopefully will internalize some of the processes that you're demonstrating, and that they can resolve their future disputes.
Right. In the community model, one of the guiding principles is to model the kind of behavior you want them to engage in.
Like
the
parents.
worst. Actually, a better mediation is to have people walk out. I did one time. People were fighting over a fence line, neighbors, and they were fighting over lots of things. We got all the issues out of the way.
We had a shooting out in Wallace one time.
Because these things, that's exactly what over these sorts of
things. Yeah.
So we had everything settled except where the fence should go. And both sides said, well, I now like you, but I didn't understand that. I still want to know what the law says. So I still want to go to court. And the other side said, well, so do I. And we said, so if they rule against you, you're going to, oh, yeah, I'll be fine. Because, now I know they're not trying to mess with me. They both just want to know where this line is. That was a successful mediation. I've had others where we've actually reached an agreement, but they never want to talk to each other again. They don't like each other. You've had to separate them and do. That's really not. You may have settled that dispute, but you really haven't succeeded in mediation because you didn't get these people
won the battle, but not the war.
Right, to learn. So to speak. Exactly. Because you want these people to go out in the world and use these skills and go, if I just listen and I ask questions and I let them know that I've heard them and I tell them what I want and I tell them why I want it, I might be able to have a better outcome.
What are the most common disputes that you come across? I mean, and what are they family? Are they work? Are they like neighbor disputes or
neighbor and maybe business? People that loan people money, or people that bought something but weren't satisfied with either the quality of the work they got or the product that they got.
Because we have a situation.
It's confidential, so I'm trying to think of things that I not really give, not really with a lot of detail.
I have a work at work, and we have two groups of people who have to work with each other, but they've learned to distrust each other so much that they just can't work with each other anymore. And so now we're calling in a mediator to try to talk with us, and one person would say, well, they're going to have us sign something at the end of it. I don't want to sign anything. And I say, well, maybe you don't have to sign
Right.
something. Maybe you just have to, just say this is the beginning of a process of trying to talk with each other. And so, but yeah, and this is just within a small business that, one department just can't get along with the other department.
Yeah, it runs a gamut. I've done divorce, alimony, child custody,
That doesn't always have to go through
consumer, small business, a lot of landlord tenant, usually on the move out, fence boundaries, garbage cans in the street, car and blocking my driveway. It runs the gamut.
It could be anything.
But what you said, I did one time where it was a manager, employee, and the manager said that he didn't want to mediate. That his supervisor said he was going to mediate, and he said, "Well, I'll talk." He says, "But she is not coming back to work in my department. Period."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, no, I'm not here to tell you what you have to do." And about midway through the mediation, it magically was going really well, and he looked at her and said, "So when do you want to come back to work?"
Really? Yeah. Yeah, because they actually started listening to each other rather than taking postures and positions.
And I think that's really critical, in that we don't tell people like how to solve their problem or give them advice. We don't appear to take one side or the other. You facilitate, and you kind of let them brainstorm and work it out in ways that are much more flexible than they're ever going to get in court.
Yeah. And maybe ideas that you wouldn't have come up with because you're not really familiar with
You're not familiar with them or the situation. You don't know what will or what may or may not work for them. So you let them come up with something, and then it's their agreement.
Exactly. It's their agreement, and you make sure that, and again, you want them to be informed consumers, because you don't want them to enter into an agreement where they're going to experience buyer's remorse or not honor their agreement.
Yeah. Not like we're actually charging them to do this.
So you don't charge?
No, at this point we don't. That with a lot of programs,
nice.
a lot of programs have a sliding scale, and it actually interesting, and we probably will, because what most programs find is when you charge, certainly we wouldn't deny it to anybody for the inability to pay, but we find that when you do have a sliding scale, the participation increases and the settlement rate goes up. And I think it's because then people feel like they've invested in the process.
And we can't deny somebody the opportunity to participate in mediation just because they may not have the funds. So it's kind of like that scale it's kind of like the scale at the courthouse where they have the fee waivers. So we have to honor the fee waiver criteria as well.
So your website again is
www.disputeresolution.org.
And your phone number is?
We have two different phone numbers.
Two different phone numbers. The one that is the Bar Association is?
Yeah, it's 948-0125.
And our mediation services line is 474-8794.
Very good. And we're talking with Janette Rossell and Robert Oakes of the Dispute Resolution Group. Or
Dispute Resolution Services of the San Joaquin County Bar.
That's right, downtown Stockton. Wonderful. So, so anyway, I wanted to talk to you about, greater society these days. It seems that, I don't know if I'm the only one to notice, but it seems that more and more people are becoming more and more polarized and not willing to or not able to listen to each other's arguments anymore. It's just been it's been most notable in the last 2 or 3 years, but even before then, you go back to say Newt Gingrich time, and starting with sort of a lack of civility towards people who you don't agree with, and it just seems to be the leadership model that seems to pervade these days. And so I'm wondering, are you seeing in your work, I'm sure you've been doing this for a few years, are you seeing that more and more people are not able to listen to each other because of the leadership model they're seeing, or is it just the same when you get down to actual day-to-day mediation types of things? Has it changed at all?
Well,
I think it's just emotional. I'm not sure that what we see is that heavily influenced by political climate.
Okay.
But when people get emotional and they're very invested emotionally, then I think that kind of clouds their thinking, and that's not unusual. I mean, that's when they get blocks. They want to be right, and they need to be justified and vindicated. So that's typically what I see. I don't know about the lack of civility as our society at large lately is. The civil discourse no longer exists, apparently.
Well, but when you get in the neighborhood, when you get to the person to person, I mean, I ran for office last year and went door to door, and people who I would think that wouldn't agree with me politically, I mean, we're perfectly fine. We were discussing things, and it wasn't that. It just didn't seem to have the same sort of rancor that you would see if you look at a Facebook post, or if you look at something that's on a on a talk show or something.
Well, actually, that's a really good point, and it's one of the reasons for this formalization of mediation. If you look back, in an agrarian society, it was a small group, typically family, family next neighbor family, and so they resolve conflict because they had to survive together. And then we moved to the industrial age, and conflict got resolved by like the machinery that was running then they had arbitration and labor unions, and everybody agreed because there was some fair process. And so with those breakdowns and the individualization, so really what mediation as a profession or as a service is to try to put in those things that were lost when those systems changed. And I think the challenge today, and we'll see where this goes, it'll work itself out somehow, is the communication. If people are texting and emailing and communicating via Facebook, you can't get the nuance that you need with the face-to-face, the tone of voice, the body language, because very little, the actual verbal communication is the smallest percentage of the communication that takes place. And so that's what we try to break through that stuff so that we can get people to talk to each other. Because you're absolutely right. And at what we do at our level, we're at the community level. We're at the local level where you really do have a shared interest in living in a peaceful community.
And I think that just actually goes to support what you said. If you meet people face to face, and we're sitting around the table and looking at each other's eyeballs. When you meet face to face and you're having a conversation, I think that it's easier to maybe filter your responses, or maybe give more thought to what you're about to say, because you're face to face. It is so easy to slap something up on Facebook without any
like a tweet
any
or
repercussion.
or,
It's so quick to just type something and send it out into the world without thinking about it's going to be out there forever. There are going to be people that this offends.
Right.
If you didn't give any thought to it before you just popped it right out. So I think that those platforms tend to prevent us taking a moment to give consideration to what we're saying or what we're putting out there. And then that creates, misunderstanding, mistrust, anger. You see, it's the tweet storm.
There's a point during the community model. There's a point initially, the parties talk to the mediators, and really the point to that is to get out the information, to find out what's important to the parties, but also so that the other party will actually, for the first time, hear that person, but not have to be planning his or her defense, and instead can hear this person because the person's talking to another person. And then they talk to each other. And during that part, there are moments of silence. And you have to learn to be really comfortable with the silence, because frequently that's where the breakthroughs come through, because somebody has said something that no one in the room had heard before. And then you have to think about it. And the person thinks. And it's not that they're not long periods of silence, but then somebody will offer something, and you're as a mediator, you're sitting there going, I did not see that coming. And this is why I said, rarely have I ever been in one of those settings where it's fewer than 5 times where the cases where this dispute has settled where I thought it would settle. They always, they always wow, that was important to them. This wasn't. So.
Well,
that's why attorneys always answer the question. You ask an attorney a question, and they'll always say, that depends. It depends on all the stuff I don't know so far.
Yeah.
The things I'm going to find out later.
Right.
And I think it's the same way in mediation. You know, the outcome's going to depend on what you uncover
Yeah.
Right.
while you're working.
It also demonstrates the shortcomings of litigation in that setting, because I'm using my legal background and training and experience to say, here's where this thing should end up.
That's right.
And to find out the parties want something entirely different. It's like, if you went into court, both of you would have walked out mad, even though one of you would have declared a winner, because neither of you would have gotten what you could have gotten here.
Right. Sometimes, and sort of a little bit off the topic, but sometimes at work, we have a sort of it's not a big office, but sometimes people phone me and just start talking about work, and they're just upstairs and they're talking to me on the phone, like, and we're supposed to have a long conversation. Said, how about if I just come up and talk with you? Because even when you're talking on the phone, or you miss a lot of communication, and then definitely in the email type of thing. I mean, that's where this dispute that we're having at work. I mean, sometimes it's just the tone of voice or the tone of that you've typed in,
right? And
it just is, and people can take it in an offensive way, or they say, well, you're just putting me down, or just and if you do talk with people, and that was the thing when I was going door to door. It's like I live in a conservative area, but we can talk to each other. It's not impossible. But if you watch Fox News, or if you watch any of the news media, it just seems that I guess the thing that sells papers is conflict.
Absolutely. That's what makes a story.
That's what makes the story.
That's the story. If there's no conflict, there's no good story.
That's right. Who wants to just sit around watching people hold hands and not getting along? I mean, that's pretty boring.
Well, yeah, interestingly enough, we have some of the lowest crime rates that we've had ever since they've been recording them, and people feel less safe than they ever have before. But that's partly because today you can get international news, national news, and you can learn about the child who was abducted in Kansas this morning.
Front page.
That used to happen way more frequently than it does today, but you feel less safe because you never heard about it 20 years ago, and today you hear about it immediately.
We're inundated with bad news and conflict.
And then you just want to pick up your kid, and you don't want them to mingle with other kids. I mean, you just want to make certain that they're safe, and you try to do everything you possibly can to stay safe, because you're in constant fear of something happening that has a very low chance of happening.
Low likelihood of happening.
Yeah. Right. So in terms of mediation, in terms of the larger setting, we look at we talk about person to person, and we could talk about Donald Trump, about how he's going in meetings with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, or if we're talking about mediation or peace talks over Palestine and Israel and the future rights. Given your experience in mediation, what are sort of the baseline requirements for those talks to succeed?
A willingness to talk.
Willingness to talk.
That would be the big one.
They have to. You have to. And I think in other administrations this has happened, because he's a terrible negotiator. From if and you can't do this in a complex world, but if you only if you only judge it based upon a single transaction, and in our interconnected world it's impossible, that winner take all, win at all costs, it doesn't succeed, because you're going to interact and run into these people again in another time. Right. So what you and with nations, there's a ton of interest. So the issues are they're multifaceted. Is how can you assure that each side's interest, because this is really about interest-based negotiation, not about what they say they want, but what do they really want? And how can you give them both of these things, give each side these things, and let them save face?
Right.
And you have to. the Israeli conflict is you have to acknowledge the history.
Right.
And you can't just, if you ignore that history, it's highly unlikely that you will be able to put together a deal. Even in our settings, when we do their talk, we think they're done talking, and if the deal starts to fall apart when they start talking to each other, that means something in the history we missed. There's a piece.
So the foundation hasn't been laid.
That's right. And so some of the very best negotiators, and there are lots of trade-offs. There are lots of trade-offs, and people go, well, we shouldn't have to compromise. And what we always say is, well, you're not really compromising what you're likely to get. You're compromising your aspiration. You know, it's like,
the perfect
the perfect doesn't exist. It's like,
you got everything you wanted.
Yes. So you're going to have to compromise that, because there's no scenario under which you're going to get everything you want. Yeah. And so let's talk about what's realistic, and then what are the things you're willing to trade off. And this is what we do, and is let's list your values and how you value each of those things. What are these variables? And that's how you can put together a deal. I mean, you look at like the Oslo Accords, when there was an actual agreement in Israel and Palestine, and there was a shaking of hands, and there was some agreements that certain things were going to be done. But it sounds like you're saying, some of the foundational work wasn't done, and some of the the mistrust is there. Or you look at Korea. I mean, the thing is that right now, well, we're going to give we're going to take sanctions off, and he's going to give up their nuclear program. But in terms of the trust building steps, have not really been made. I don't know that the United States has lightened up on any sanctions, or that the other side has given up anything of real substance, because I think there's still some deep distrust to say, well, you still want to overthrow my regime, and say, well, and I'm not going to give up my country. And so that's sort of that's where the discussion still lay, because that foundation of trust hasn't been put down. Right, and those are so much more exponentially more complex, because now you're talking about representatives of a government as well as of a people who are not all of the same mind. Right. As opposed, it's hard enough. It's hard enough if you have a family on one side. In a mediation, if you have a husband and a wife, where I've seen this, where the husband or the wife is willing to accept mediated settlement and the other party is not. And they're on the one side, and so then you're ending up mediating between them to get those two to agree to the deal that one of them is willing to accept, or altering it and making sure that the other side. So yes, it gets exponentially much more complex.
Well, it doesn't sound dissimilar, though. I mean, on a person-to-person basis, or it's much more complex, but
it's not dissimilar. I know when I first started doing this, I was in law school, and I thought, doing the community mediation piece, thinking like, I can't wait till I'm a lawyer and I'm handling big dollar cases where people are much more rational. And I've never had a case that just came down on the dollars. There was always this personality piece. There was something that somebody needed, and that's as a mediator, I'm always on the hunt for that, because I know that is what we have this. That one of the sayings is, you build a bridge and invite them to cross it. And so I'm always looking for the things that I can use to build the bridge, so that they feel safe.
Well, that sounds like a good lesson.
That's like the story
life,
I was telling you about when I was, I had that mediation that I was doing, and I asked the gentleman, "What is it you'd like to see? What is it you'd like to see happen today?" And he was stumbling around trying to figure out how to tell me what he wanted. Apparently, it wasn't just about the money. It's not, the money wasn't. And he started complaining about the other side and doing this to a bunch of people, and but he couldn't tell me. I said, what would you want the judge to tell this person today? But people get tongue-tied.
So angry.
They're angry. They're insulted. They're offended.
I don't want to feel offended anymore. I don't want to feel,
Yeah, and so I don't think. I mean, a lot of times, there's money involved in a lot of it. But the money's not the real big hang-up.
Right.
It's the principle. It's my feelings. It's an injustice of some sort that they want rectified, and they just don't know how. So if they can't tell me what exactly they want the judge to say, I know that there's some emotional component underneath there that we haven't quite got resolved, that we haven't really heard about.
I was doing one time in a court. It was a small business dispute and a two-partner dissolution of the partnership. So that seems relatively easy. It wasn't very big money. It was about $20,000 in inventory and some back rent. And I couldn't get there, and I couldn't get there, and I couldn't get there.
Like a bad divorce?
And I just couldn't figure this out. It's just with the lawyers and so finally, husband and wife on one side, a guy on the other side, and she gets up and she says something. We're going to take a break because I'm just like at a loss. And she says something to her husband that indicates that she's related to the guy across the table. And I said, wait, what? And she said, oh, he's my brother. And
that might have been
new information.
Would have been good to know.
So, because nothing we talked about compromising the money was getting us in. So we negotiated the relationship, and the money went away. I mean, it still needed to be settled, but we were able to divide the money once we
figured out what the real problem was.
Could deal with this
underlying issue.
And typically, and a court of law will, maybe once in a while, but rarely will the court of law get there.
Yeah, because why would it? I mean, the thing is I mean, when you're reading the law is pretty antiseptic.
Yeah.
It's kind of,
your hurt feelings don't matter.
And I watched the judge explain to people this afternoon, the law says, you have to show me actual violence. You have to show me a credible threat of violence. You have to show me conduct that supports a reasonable belief that you're in danger. And she repeated herself over and over again. And people just thought they were going to get up there and she was going to be sympathetic and this would be the exception, I think. They were just so sure the judge was going to understand and believe them and understand how hurt they were that they ignored the law. So, and the other, my lead mediator and I were sitting there and I went, okay, that's one out of 3 so far that was a legitimate restraining order case. We could have mediated. We could have mediated between these other people and gotten them an agreeable resolution. We could have worked it out. I mean, because we would listen to all those, hurt feelings or distrust or, resentment. We would have worked through that with them and come to some peaceful resolution that would have made their lives better. They don't have to go away best friends, but they would have at least been able to civilly deal with each other and have peace in their life. But they're just so emotionally. The judge is going to hear me and decide I'm right because that guy's a jerk over there. That guy's a jerk is not a reason for a restraining order. So
you get those, and I've had them in. One particular one was the party said, "No, we don't want to go with you," and the bailiff said, "You have to go talk. You don't have to agree. You just have to go talk. You have to go talk." So they came in and we did our little. And then one of the guys, and the other nice thing about the mediation is it's not in open court; it's in private, so you can.
Is it like this? I mean, is it like a
it's a little table.
We sit at a table and talk.
Okay.
And you sit and talk, and it's confidential. Nobody. That's right. We don't impose a decision, and so the guy who didn't want to come and mediate, the other guy said, there's a neighbor dispute. He said, I behaved really badly. I was tired. It was a bad day. I shouldn't have done that. I'm really embarrassed. I want to apologize. I want to shake your hand. I want to be a good neighbor. I mean, all the things you could hope for. But if we hadn't made them come and talk to us, and the judge wouldn't have cared. It's like that's not. I don't have time for that. I got six cases behind you, and somebody who might be really dangerous. So I need to, I need to dispense with this. And we give people that opportunity for that hearing. The interesting thing is in all of the research about dispute resolution is people will accept something that's adverse to them if they feel it was fair. And one of the greatest ways people feel something is fair is if they feel they were heard.
Like an election. Like, if it's a fair election and your candidate lost, then you'll accept the
Right.
judgment because you knew it was a fair judgment.
And you know that next time you might prevail. But if the deck's always stacked, then it doesn't have legitimacy.
Right. Yeah. So it's that's a lot of the stuff you guys talk about. I mean, are just good life lessons. I mean, if you it's good that you're there as mediators to be between, but just thinking about how people go about their just day-to-day interactions with each other, and just think about listening and think about the other person and think about where they're coming from, and I guess that's that empathy word, but just understanding where disputes come from, and that it's not always because the person is stupid.
No, they just don't agree with you always.
Most of the time,
you don't agree with me. That's interesting. Tell me why you don't agree with
exactly.
me. Why don't you agree with me?
It depends.
What are you thinking?
We all get busy. We all get hectic. We get and so all of us. Yeah. We all find ourselves, and mediators find themselves in conflicts, sometimes in having behaved badly ourselves. And sometimes you need that third party. And like I said, I consider, like in the community setting, if you called us with a neighbor dispute and we helped you with that dispute and you walked away having resolved that dispute, and a month later, 6 months later, you called us with another dispute, we'd kind of consider that we had maybe failed because we wanted you to be able to walk out. We never want to see you again, and not because because we want
you to understand.
Yeah, because we want you to have walked out with the skill set to do this yourself without us.
Yeah. Think through your actions before that gets to the point where you have to go to court,
or
mediation,
or at least be able to back away,
or be able to hear the other person. And that's a lot of what is not happening is no one's listening.
Yeah,
everybody wants to be heard and no one's listening. So they need to. You need to be able to step back and listen to what the other person is saying, and openly listen to what the other person is saying.
Yeah, and then the other thing is trying to build loop backs into, because the conflict might happen again. So oftentimes in these settings we'll say, okay, so if you come home tired again and the garbage cans are blocking your driveway, what are you going to do next time? Instead of sit on the horn and call the person all these dirty names, he says, I'm going to get out of the car, I'm going to knock on his door and say, can you please move your garbage cans? It's like, okay, and then how are you going to respond? And so you play through these different scenarios because people get tired and they might walk out going, oh, this was so wonderful. But in the heat of the moment, what are you going to do? So building in the loop backs to help them foresee in the future that it's not always going to be rosy.
Yeah, because Peace and Justice Network is always, that's one of our missions, is the nonviolent resolution of conflict. And, because, the alternative when there isn't an agreement is war. We're talking about, there are wars all over the world, and maybe we're not noticing them because there's not a whole lot of Americans coming home in body bags, but still,
I think it's always been that way.
Yeah, there's
always been war. There's always been conflict.
Yeah.
And I think unless my neighbor's son or my son, unless somebody that touches us comes home in a body bag or without limbs, I don't think we really are cognizant.
But it would be nice if our leaders had the level of empathy and understanding of what it means for these countries to go through war, to try so that we would try to mediate their disputes.
Well, that was the point of the United Nations, and of course, it's on the honor system, but that was the point of the United Nations, and that was certainly the point of the League of Nations before that. And it's the recognition, and I think that's why some of this stuff that's going on right now is so scary, because if you forget the history, that the purpose of NATO and the purpose of the U.S. contribution isn't because it's fair share or everybody. It's that we understood between World War I and World War II that the punitive measures in World War I led to World War II, and we don't want to do that because that cost is really big.
Right. Millions and millions.
And it is true. We so there's the, what are you going to do? You can just walk away and do nothing. You can mediate, you can arbitrate, you can litigate, or you can fight.
Right.
And violence is the extreme where we don't want to go.
Right.
But so what you one of the things you raise there that's really important is that to be successful at the mediation is it's not our values. It's not the mediators. Our only value is that you talk to each other and that you find a way to talk to each other. But it's your values about fairness and right that will determine the parameters of the agreement. Because I have my lived experience. You have your lived experience. And that's why it's able to be successful, because we're not imposing, we're not telling you, well, this is fair, as I know fairness.
Well, that's pretty optimistic, because I think what you're assuming then is that everybody wants to do the right thing. I mean, there are folks who believe that, you know, maybe inherently humans are not good at their base. You know, that they would rather do unto others before they do unto you. But I mean, what you're saying is saying, you know, as long as if we can bring people to the table and we can get them to talk about things, then a good result will happen. And that's pretty optimistic.
Most of the time it will.
Yeah.
And it can. And if you just look, the vast majority of people, and it's somewhat built in our DNA, because there is some innate give and take. I mean, I'm empathetic, and I am willing to give, because we've learned that if I'm not, if I beat you up today, you might beat me up tomorrow. And therefore, you know, so it is optimistic, and throughout history we lose that once in a while, but hopefully we haven't.
But not just that self-interest. I mean, you know, when I was going door to door, I mean, I wasn't getting beaten on because I'm a little bit more liberal than they were, and it was like, you know, we're still able to have a reasonable, rational discussion because we have shared values that are, you know, that I think we know what right is and what wrong is, you know, and people sort of have internalized that if they're not sociopaths. Right. And so, you know,
that's right. That's absolutely right.
Yes.
That's right.
And we can't all cure all the sociopaths.
No.
But I think that, I think at the bottom line is, I think we all want to live a peaceful life. No one really wants chaos and drama.
No.
And I think if we look at what their values are and we find where we can create that, bring them together in that, have a peaceful relationship, then I think that's where we'll succeed.
Wonderful. So your website again is
www.disputeresolution.org.
Okay, and your phone numbers are?
You get that again. Keep up
So
with
we don't
the
call
state.
our own phone number.
I should just leave it out.
Call your own phone numbers.
It's 209-474-8794.
Wonderful. And so this evening, Peace and Justice Connections, we've been talking with Dispute Resolution Services in San Joaquin County
Bar.
Yeah. And it's been with Janette Rossell and Robert Oakes. I appreciate your time, and it's been a wonderful hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.